This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
So, it's very fun. All right, today, first day. Yay! A couple things for presenters. I have a collection of dongles and other various gizmos up here, including iOS power supply, and sort of Brave and iOS dongle if you want to hook up to the projector. Ethernet cable for folks with a MacBook Air, anything you might need. We've got dongles up here. If you forgot yours, feel free to use them. Podiums up here. I can help you toggle between different things. Bathrooms. There are 3 restrooms right outside this door back here with exit sign. The door is unlocked, so you can go out and come right back in that door. You don't have to make the trek all the way around. Lunch will be right here in this room at 12. I think that's it. Any questions? Oh, one other thing I wanted to say, one other thing I forgot to say thank you to before I take Lisa's question, is I wanted to also thank Britton for all of his hard work in helping us stream the session. So Britton from U of M, thank you very much.
Audio's good now.
Audio's good. Okay, so I think we're live streaming now. Is that correct? I'm going to push the magic button so people can find it.
What
The
you hear is
hordes on
not
the
a
internet
test.
that are waiting.
What you hear is not a test.
Okay.
You're rapping at the beat.
All right, so now we're official, people. Okay, so we have some lightning talks to kick things off. I think everyone is here who's giving a lightning talk. I didn't schedule them in any particular order, and I've talked to everyone but Eric to see if anyone felt strongly about going first or last, and no one did. So, Jeff? Oh, Lisa had a question. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just curious, you wouldn't have to have your Magic Bag of Tricks MacBook Air card, right?
I do.
For when?
Is this MagSafe 2 or MagSafe 1?
I don't know.
This is MagSafe.
Actually,
No.
it's better.
I've got
I've got the other one.
I don't need it right now. I just need
Okay,
something else.
anyway, lightning talks. Anybody want to go first? Do we have a volunteer? Allison. Great. All right. Oh. Uh-oh. Kristen is rushing up to unlock the computer. Thank you very much, Allison. I'll leave this right here in case you need it.
Everyone always wants to hear about Mark records first, obviously, so I will go first. I gave you a very nice, pretty green PowerPoint for the morning, so you can kind of watch along with that. So this is about getting some good Mark records for our catalogers from DSpace so that they can process things fairly quickly, and I'll go through that. I just wanted to acknowledge that the program that our systems folks use was based on a program that was developed for the MSpace project at University of Manitoba. So it was Jonathan Roby that did that, so we got the file from him and then modified it as we do, because everybody knows everybody's cataloging practices are very local. So, just a quick history of ETDs at Uwaterloo. They actually started a pilot project for Etvs back in 1997 and worked on a prototype database then. Then, based on that, they put in a proposal for a system. And so in 2000, we actually started taking a voluntary submission of Etvs at Waterloo. And 2006, they actually switched it to mandatory. So all of our master's and our doctoral theses have to be submitted electronically. And at that point, we got DSpace, which of course we named UW Space for University of Waterloo. And if those are interested, can visit the project page I linked from the PowerPoint. So in terms of our cataloging workflows, obviously when we just had the print and the fiche, we just cataloged them as they came in. Once there's a voluntary ETD, the cataloger would just kind of go check and see whether it was available online and add it. But once we had mandatory ETD, we no longer got the print and eventually no longer got the fiche. And so they kind of needed to know what's in the UW space. And we thought at the same time it would be nice to have kind of MARC records sent to us. That would be great. And we could just load them in, do some minor editing. So you might be wondering, why did Adam write us a Java program to do this? Couldn't I just go into MARC edit and use the OAI feed, bring it into MARC edit, make it some records? And you can do that. It's missing kind of some essential information that we, of course, would have to keep adding to the files. Didn't have our standard thesis notes. Again, all of these things we could do through MARC edit, but we wanted a little bit more automated process. And so at the time we had a co-op student, Adam Patterson, who later was on contract with us, and he started looking around and he saw that at Manitoba they actually had a program that could do this. And what's nice about this, it does more than just obviously give us a MARC record. It actually checks UW space to see, is there a new submission? Does it have an embargo, or has there an embargo been lifted? It actually does a query for all that stuff. It creates the records, it mails them out to us. So it's a little bit more automated than the cataloger kind of pulling this stuff in through MARC edit. And recently, Graham Faulkner at Waterloo modified the program for me because we went to DSpace 3. I'm told there was no DSpace 2. It went right from 1 to 3. And it broke. The program broke. I stopped receiving MARC records, and we started having to do things manually, and it's very sad. So he fixed that for us, and he also updated it so they would be RDA records, for those of you who know that new cataloging code, RDA. So the program, as I said, it emails MARC records for new submissions. If it's embargoed, it does not email to us. So some of you know that sometimes things are embargoed because people are waiting on a patent, or they're waiting for publications. There might be a little bit of a delay before the thesis is available. I get an alert from UW Space itself about new titles, but then I get this MARC record files. And it also makes sure that it doesn't send me an empty MARC record file, which is nice. But it still sends me a nice email saying, by the way, there were no new submissions. And the type of things it does for the MARC records, it does create those control fields like the 008 that we were missing. It takes all the Dublin core fields that are in UW Space and converts them into the proper MARC. And it adds things, makes sure the indicators are correct, and adds things for me like the subfield e-author for RDA relator codes, that sort of thing. Double checks that there's only one tag for something like 100. And because this is Code4Lib, I have to put a little section of the Java code up here, even though I know nothing about Java. I know a tiny bit of Python. And Graham assured me that I had to put this in Courier, not my standard font I had for my PowerPoint. So there you go. Here's some Courier of the Java program. But this is basically just creating the string for the 100 tag. So it's gone and did a query earlier on in the program to get all the fields out of the DSpace, and now it's just putting together the 100 field here with its first and second indicators, its subfield A, adding in the name, then it's going to put a comma at the end and the subfield E author, and make sure that there's only one 100 tag, and it's going to create the string. And of course later on in the program it actually compiles the whole record together. So I have the file with me if anyone is interested and wants to look at the whole file. So example of some of the modifications. So you get the title, for example, out of UW Space, but for us in a 245 tag, that's not enough. We need it to have the proper indicators. So there's actually a table in there. It looks at the LC table to see whether it's a non-filing character, adds in the correct indicator. Because of ACR2, we actually had them normalize the titles to sentence case, because sometimes the students put things in all caps and things like that. It looks for a semicolon in the title, and if it's there, it puts that rest of that title into subfield B for us. It adds in the subfield C, which is the statement of responsibility, so it puts a by and it puts the author's name in the correct order. It used to add the general material designation, but not anymore with RDA. And some of the local requests we had, we always put UW as publisher. Now under RDA, because it's online, we actually can do that legally, but we used to do it anyway. We put in abbreviations for the dream game, make sure they're using the correct abbreviations. Most importantly on this list is just that we put in an added entry for the department or school. And most of the time, the form that's in dspace matches the authority record, but some of them don't, so it actually has those mapped for us. So it puts in a 710, University of Waterloo, subfield B, Department of, and then the name. But if it doesn't match the authority, and the program actually takes care of that for us so that it was going to validate when it comes into our system. And spaces, so the students copy and paste their abstract into dspace. It's not always pretty, so it does things like removes extra spaces in the middle of those, fixes some of the characters up, which isn't caught by dspace. And it sends me a lovely email, goes out to me and to Graham with some explanation, even tells me to have a nice day at the end, so that's very nice of Adam to add that in there. And then for those of you who are interested, you can look at my PowerPoint a little bit later, and you can look at the actual mark record. This is from MarcEdit, that's why you're seeing those equal signs. But you can see that it has things like the author's name added in there. It's got our publication information for University of Waterloo. It's got things like what the actual, it puts in the fact whether it's PhD, a Master of Architecture, whatever the degree is, and it adds in that 710 with the appropriate department name, so that will validate the rate 56 and all that sort of stuff. So if you have any questions, you've got my information here. You also, I asked Graham, it's not actually up on GitHub, eventually it will be, but he's quite happy to share the file. For those of you who have dspace, he says there are some things it references in the dface config file that also have to be changed, so he can give you all that explanation. And I do have the file with me if anyone wants to take a look at it. So that's it. Don't know if anyone has any questions now. No mark record questions.
Does the script do anything about adding subjects or that sort of thing?
We don't have it adding subjects. Right now when we catalog it, we try to add in a basic class member. I would love at some point if someone could figure out how to grab something out of the abstract and give it actual subjects. We could add keywords in. We actually strip out the keywords. They're the, just because they're in our system, we just have the Library of Congress subject headings, so we don't have the keywords in there. But you could have the keywords like in a 653 or something that the students supply. But if someone can figure out some automatic classification for me, that would be awesome. And I'll put these slides up on SlideShare and tweet them out if people want to do that. Maybe link them to the wiki.
Thank you very much. So that could possibly be another Hackfest topic for this afternoon, adding subjects to script. Anyone want to go second? Sarah. Great. And is the audio, are we getting reports audio is better? Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Park. I am a technology and engineering librarian at Lovejoy Library, Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. I just moved there on July 1st. And I prepared this presentation with my colleague at Northwest Missouri State University. This is my journey to design, develop, and evaluate Search All. You might wonder what is Search All? It's a discovery layer on top of serial solutions summon and other locally developed database and search engines. It's kind of bento style. You probably heard the name, the bento, like a Japanese lunchbox. This is the one shot. So basically it shows articles and books and media, databases and genres that relevant to the search query in a one shot in a bento style. The articles and books and media comes from Serial Solutions Summon, and databases coming from PHPMyAdmin locally, and genres from Serial Solutions Title Search, and library web page is from Google Custom Search. We strip the HTML code and display it again. And then more search options goes to Google Scholar, because so many people love Google Scholar, right? So the last year in Code4Lib Midwest in Iowa City, I presented our development design story, and I start having questions. How can I measure or evaluate this effort? In addition to implementing the summons on our site, we also spent about 3 or 4 months just developing this search all. It's a Ruby on Rails, almost 3 or 4 months. How can we justify the development effort? And so I was looking for ways to measure it. So people suggest me look at the clicks, usages, or even keywords. Everything was vague at that point. But then by fall, I got this idea of Google Analytics that I applied Jquery together. I can collect almost every user clicks and keywords on our website, almost everything. So previously, I was able to collect the keywords typed on Google custom search box, Google Analytics. But Jquery allows me to collect what's on the search box, our own search box. So this is our own little search box, tagged one, nothing fancy. So I implemented this in February, and look at it. The library has about 500 or 600 web pages. And per semester, we have about 250 to 320,000 page views. From page alone, we have 66,000 to 72,000 hits. The partial of the last semester, we have about 17 or 18,000 hit uses on the custom box. So it's about 25%, or maybe I can say 30% of users come to our front page, use these custom search boxes. That's what people use. Search all used about 35% of it, and a lot of people still going back to the article search and do the EBSCOhost meta searches, and power search is library catalog search. So I also embedded this Google Analytics tracking code in every links on this search all. It's lovely. And look at it. So about 46% of our users clicked something in the article. And 42% of our users click the books and media. Other 11% or 12% goes to the other part, like the database names or genre, or some navigation going back to the library homepage or Northwest homepage or West End. Quite interesting. So I look at this data and then look at what should we do. This is still my journey. I probably want your input too. Do we need 3-column design, all of this? Since our majority of our users click the books, media, and articles, do we have to expand it? Maybe. Items like the database names and genres, do we need to keep all those categories on the page? So So we have more questions, so we will solve it later. Things like that. So looking for ideas. I'm drawing myself to the subject of your dinner table today, after drunken or not. So if you have any idea, you can ask me, let me know, or anytime. So thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Have you, I know there have been a couple of other institutions that have done some sort of evaluation project, but oftentimes either on the interface that the vendor provides, or maybe on their own custom solution, which is different than yours. Did you guys find any useful information from any of those other evaluation projects?
Well, I look at the serial solutions someone uses. Somehow that data doesn't represent our collected data. And because we do not have our own server, we cannot look at the log file directly, but this Google Analytics and Jquery allows me a lot more powers to analyzing the data. So something, other database,
Well, way that Serial Solutions counts searches, for instance, in their statistics package is every time you do a search, and then if you click a facet, it counts it as a different search. So it's a hyperinflated number of searches. And so we actually wrote a script in ours that sort of dedupes those and tries to, it's not perfect, but it comes pretty close to determining whether somebody's doing the same search that they've been working on and refining it, or whether it's a new search. Because it only works in Summon 1.0. We haven't written a new version.
Well, but I don't know, someone's result is pretty lower in my case.
Really?
Yeah, so it was really off lower, so I don't know, I mean, we already have our numbers here, so
Yeah.
I didn't really look at that part, but
Okay, yeah.
something you might want to look at. It's Google Analytics with jQuery. Somebody said in a Primo, they embedded jQueries on the Primo search engine. They can see where users clicks and everywhere is right there.
Yeah.
It's a Primo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. All right. Brian's next.
Do we get the PC back?
Yeah. There's a fancy little screen here.
Oh, PC.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a cool resource. Hope the Grand Rapids folks know about that, by the way. It's a local wiki, webpage about Grand Rapids anyone can edit. But somebody go look this real quick, sorry. C4LNW14. Subites. So, hi there, good morning. My name is Brian Zelloff. I'll be graduating this coming spring from GISLIS down at Urbana-Champaign. And I work inside the University Library in a specialized research services unit called the Scholarly Commons. I'm a front-end web guy with a lot of experience working with youth and community institutions and library patrons around digital literacies. I just got back from a trek around Iceland, which explains this picture. As a cool side note, sheep have no natural predators in Iceland, so farmers let them roam free for about 3/4 of the year, at which time you can catch them walking down the street or grazing outside your tent at 3 o'clock in the morning. Also, as a side note, I'm organizing with a friend of mine, a fellow GISLister, a Nodejs meetup in Urbana-Champaign. Not as experts, but as folks wanting to start some conversations and learn. So if anyone here works with Node, I'd be interested to cast a vote for, if there's free time for Hackfest later on, for any activity around that would be great. So in just an FYI fashion, I'm going to talk about a little bit of my experience recently migrating a library mobile's web app over to an XML-based content management system, which is kind of cool. And also some use cases around technology that we have at the Scholarly Commons. This is a mobile app that some good folks and students at UIUC have built. It's a mobile app that allows people to, especially undergrads is where it started, find books, check out books, pay fines. Sometimes the stacks is kind of a maze in our library, especially probably others. There's some GPS-enabled stuff that helps you actually find resources. So it's a cool app. It's now also on iOS. It was a big static PHP include of many, many thousands of files to kind of build it dynamically each time. Just the website, which is more of a documentation about it, not even the app. So I found this cool Russian-based content management system called Monstro, which is a flat file CMS. It doesn't use any kind of database queries. Instead, it uses an XML file that just grows as you edit it. It's not so much of an infrastructure problem where we are. There's servers and stuff. We can handle the load. If anyone is ever involved in community-based efforts with the web, this may be a nice solution. This kind of a content management system. So the fact that it didn't make any database queries is one of the really great things about it. Another great thing about it is you can set it up to have the code mirror JavaScript text editor be a part of the admin interface. So it's really great for a bunch of techies instead of a WordPress kind of clumsy with all that tiny ICE stuff, you can actually have a text editor interface to update the web page. Before it was a pretty clunky process with lots of tiers and had to go through multiple development servers to get there. Now the whole process is streamlined, and it also looks like a nice text editor to boot. So that's another cool thing about that. So here's a homepage of the Scholarly Commons. We do a lot of stuff. We're a big referral and reference and referral service. So a lot of people come to us with all kinds of questions. We try to hook them up with experts or solve them ourselves. We also do a lot of other stuff like teach classes. One of our big things that we do is some scholarly communication stuff. So recently we just had the experience of launching an instance of Open Journal System, OJS. First Monday, folks may recognize, right, from UIC. That was one of the first library journals that used OJS and still does. We've just launched an instance of it with, for the purpose of supporting undergraduate research. And there are a couple of different departments and groups who have already put up their first issue. And that's been a fun process. Another thing that we do is teach some workshops. Recently I started teaching workshops on individual scholarly publishing with web services like WordPress and Omeka, where people come in with laptops and we actually walk through, it's kind of a multi-part workshop. We walk through setting up a local web server environment on your computer, and then installing this free software and getting all kind of plugins that may not be able to, that you may be constrained from using if you use their free online services. This way they're more in control, they're learning more about their computer and becoming more empowered. We also deal a lot with data. So a lot of folks come in trying to find data. We just recently hired a new data specialist librarian as well as a GIS specialist librarian. And there's a lot of activity that goes on with finding and analyzing data inside our lab. One of the things that the Scholarly Commons does is provides access to higher end software like SPSS and SAS that a lot of labs don't have around campus because the licensing issues are expensive and difficult. Digitization is a big thing that we do. We've got some scanners. We've got a lot of folks that come in not only to use somewhat large scanners, but also that want to do a lot of optical character recognition for very intense use cases. So big question for anyone here, if anyone knows how to OCR medieval manuscripts, you can then search it in German. I'd love to talk to you. Abby FineReader doesn't exactly do the trick. So that's a big question that we have, and I keep looking for experts in the humanities and stuff. Also, usability work and instruction work. We've got a lab adjacent to our main office where a lot of people are coming in, they're rearranging their websites, different departments, and they come in with some users with a couple different computers in this usability lab that have programs like Moray and Silverback, which are PC and Apple programs that sort of, they record screen capture as people are navigating a website and got heat senses and things like that. In that same lab, there's also Camtasia products. So a lot of library staff who are in instruction and resources come in there and create a lot of videos about how you, for their users, about how you do certain things. So that's some of the stuff that goes on in the Scholarly Commons. Here's just a few links to everything I talked about, and thank you very much.
Okay, how do you make this thing go? You just have a web browser. I get. Okay,
That
that's
work?
good. That's good.
Great.
Yay! No, that's not what I want. I want this. Hi, my name is Eric Morgan, and I want to share with you today some of the experiences that I've had with Koha. Because I have an ultimate goal, a bigger goal, of trying to see to what degree library bibliographic information can be spread on the web more out of its silo. It's a constant problem, but let's try to give it a go yet again. I visited some friends I went to Rome a couple months ago, and they're all big Koha fans. And they just got me kind of inspired about this, and they wanted to use Koha and Elasticsearch instead of the indexer that they currently use. And then I've written a book very recently about linked data. And I'm thinking all this sort of stuff might be kind of interesting to see if I can take another step. So I'm just going to share very briefly some of the stuff that I've learned so far. The Elasticsearch was extraordinarily simple. Download this Java tarball thing, uncompress it, start it up, convert your MARC records into some sort of flavor of JSON, stuff it on in, and it indexes and it searches out. I know it wasn't perfect, but it was simple. I got it running and doing it in less than a couple of hours. I think there's an enormous amount of potential there. And as you may or may not know, Elasticsearch doesn't really have any sort of database schema. You just sort of feed it JSON, and it creates fields and indexes and does a pretty good job. So this is very interesting because if you had Elasticsearch as your underlying indexer in library land, you wouldn't have to be restricted in your library catalog to bibliographic information. You could have all sorts of other different types of content as well. So that was the easy part. But my friends wanted to get Elasticsearch into Koha. And so I had to install Koha on my machine. Well, that wasn't so easy. I looked on my computer and I saw that I had quite a number of Koha installations before. And so, okay, well, this shouldn't be too much of a problem. So I started to install, and it gave me all sorts of errors. The Koha people want you to have this particular range of operating systems and this particular this and this particular that because they don't, well, because it's complicated. Gee whiz, it's an ILS, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So I had version 5.6 or something like this of MySQL, and it just wouldn't go because the MySQL client, when you put the command, your password on the command line, it stands something standard out that says, that's stupid, don't do that. And their script uses that sort of command line client to do things, and then it throws an error, and it messed up the database installation process. So they say, well, downgrade. And I thought, oh man, I really don't want to downgrade my database application. So I tried all sorts of things to try to get around this problem, but I finally downgraded my MySQL to next lower version, and installation worked great. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. Then, though, they wanted to use Zebra as their indexer. Well, I had installed Zebra a gazillion years ago, and I had upgraded it, and it did what's fine. Oh, it's beautiful. You install, you download, you configure, you make test, you install, it goes. I'm really happy with the index data people. But because the Koha people wanted this particular stuff, my Zebra application didn't work. And after reading, I figured, oh, I have to change this little configuration file. So after I changed that configuration file, it all worked great. And so after that, it was really easy, because then I could log into the Koha backend, I could import records, I could do bulk imports, I could search Z3950 databases. I learned from the command line how to index my content, and that did exactly what it was supposed to do. I would do search, and it tastes great, less filling. But what's cool about Koha is that it comes with lots of extras. For example, it does OAI out of the box. You have to turn something on behind the scenes, and you have to make a set, but then you can turn on OAI, and OAI works. It's absolutely wonderful. Then for free with Zebra, you get SRU. And so after reading and uncommenting other sort of stuff, you can get all sort of SRU stuff going on. So let me try that very quickly. Let's see here. For example, if I go back, and I just have this for my links here. A long time ago, I used my Alex catalog, and I created a SRU interface to that sort of thing. And this is all SRU running under the screen underneath, and so it's really nice. I do a search, you send it off to a style sheet, and style sheet makes files. I had all sorts of fasting that Zebra supported. It worked great, did what it was supposed to do. I was very happy. Then the problem was with the Koha thing is that it was in MARC, and I needed an SRU style sheet to do that. So I've realized that I had the mbooks thing that I had done about 5 or 6 years ago, and you could do some sort of search and you can get output this way. So that I had a style sheet. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. And then it was easy after that to simply expose my SRU interface to Koha, and it did the same thing. It's just exactly like the mbooks thing, because it outputs the same sort of mark XML sort of dealy. So that's great. I get output there, and what's really cool, it's fast. The SRU interface to the Koha index is just blazing. Before I can barely lift up my mouse, I got my results, and my machine isn't very fast at all. So I was very happy with that. And then, so then it does OAI, so I can send a query off to them and harvest my stuff. But then I'm very interested in linked data, and there's this really cool application called OAI to LOD. And what you do is you download this thing, you edit one little configuration file that points to your OAI repository, and then it will harvest all of your OAI content and then make it available as linked data. So this is the user end, and I can do this item thing here, and it will come back and list me all the URIs that I have, and I can just randomly click on one of these URIs, and I should get back this sort of content and this sort of content. Here is the actual URI, and if I were to feed that to some sort of validator, this one might work. I might get just back, yeah, I would get back a triple. I get back a pile of RDF. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that that I think that there's a lot of potential here. There's got to be a whole pile of Koha users out there, okay? And the community is strong, and the community is large, and the community is international, and they're supportive. And so I think that maybe there might be something interesting here, in that if we can figure out, Zebra works, but there's a lot of configuration, and it's really long in the tooth, and really no one cares about Z3950 anymore. So maybe, and then Solar's community for an indexer is so much bigger than Zebra. And Elasticsearch already, community is so much bigger than Zebra. So there might be a lot of open source logistical good things to using Elasticsearch as their underlying indexer instead of Zebra. And then we can turn all these Koha catalogs into essentially glorious, glorified linked data editors. And then we have some sort of configuration file in the background that turns on all of their stuff as linked data. And maybe then some way someone could harvest it all and do some cool linked data stuff with Koha. And that's all I wanted to share. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Questions? I'm sorry. What did you use to convert your mark to JSON in the beginning?
Oh, there's a Perl script. There's a Perl module that does that. I don't remember what it's called, but it's a part of the mark record family of Perl modules. Thanks.
Don't forget there's coffee in the back. Help yourself. So I want to talk a little bit about a little script I wrote recently called Css Maker. And it was basically, like a lot of things, a dumb idea I got when I was eating lunch. And it sort of worked. And maybe it'll be useful to you. So anyway, you probably know that web pages are getting bigger. They've been getting bigger for a long time. They're going to keep getting bigger. They're getting kind of huge. And that's a problem. Not only are they getting bigger, but we're downloading more and more files. We're downloading more scripts. We're downloading more images. We're downloading more CSS files. It's getting out of control, right? It's a real problem when you start walking around with these little things on potentially terrible connections. It starts to irritate people. So it's become kind of a big deal in the last couple of years to think about performance. But we've actually known for a while that performance is a problem. Back in 2006, Google did a test where they replaced their usual 10 search results with 30. And they were basically looking to see if people wanted more results. What they found was that the page actually took an extra half second to load. And because of that performance hit, they lost 20% of their traffic. So Marissa Meyer, who at the time was the project lead, pointed out that that 1/2 second actually cost them, you know, a fifth of their users. And for Google, that's a fifth of revenue, since eyeballs are money for them. So it was a big problem. And they knew, and they've been working hard on performance since then. And the rest of us are just starting to catch up. So if you're like me, and you maintain a lot of projects in a library, you probably have style sheet calls in your header that look like this. Lots of style sheets. You've got your custom style sheets, you've got your vendor style sheets, you've got all kinds of style sheets, you're calling them, you've got, you know, who knows, 10, 20, 30, I don't know. You've got a lot. And the problem is every time your browser goes to call one of those style sheets, it has to, once it sort of finds a server, does its request, and it's going to wait a little bit, the little TTFB, time till first byte. It sits there and waits for that download to start. It's just a, you know, it's a microsecond or whatever, but it's waiting for that next file. And then it does another request, and it waits for the next file. And it keeps going. And if you have a whole lot of files that you're downloading, you're waiting a lot of little microseconds for new files to start, and you're doing a lot of extra requests. If you instead just do one file, you only have to wait for one request and one time till first byte. Even though you're downloading the same number of bytes, it's still going to be faster. So it'd be better for everybody if we could just call one style sheet, right? And this is what, of course, everybody in the performance world tells you to do. Because apparently all the people that are writing about performance control all their own style sheets and live in Shangri-La or something. So I don't live there. I live in this place where I've got some CSS files on a production server, sometimes on a development server. We're not perfect. Some live on various vendor servers here and there, and a lot of these things I control, right? I can get at these and I can maintain them. But that's not all. I've got a lot of files that I don't control, right? I have the template for the GVSU website that's controlled by our web team. There's vendor style sheets that sometimes you can't get rid of and you have to deal with. There's all kinds of things that are out of my control, so I can't necessarily just maintain manually one big CSS file for each one of my projects because I'm going to lose all the updates that come from these vendors or from my institutional marketing web team when they make updates to the template. And I don't want to have to go and manually change 15 different CSS files. You know, that doesn't seem like it's saving anybody any time. It might save a couple seconds for my patrons loading things, but it's going to take me an extra week. So I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And there is some great stuff out there that can automate this for you. Maybe you're familiar with Grunt.js, which is a JavaScript. Here I'm going to sort of pretend I know what really the full extent of what it does, but it allows you to automate a lot of things. It's sort of a build tool, a lot of plugins for it that can help you on the fly concatenate, minimize, do all kinds of things for your scripts, your CSS, and other things to improve performance. There's other tools like Middleman. University of Minnesota Libraries is using Middleman to sort of do builds on the fly for all of their projects. But these are great if you have a super good infrastructure. But I don't know anybody else in this room that would probably install Node on a DreamHost virtual server, which is what our production server is. So it's kind of overkill for just a couple projects that I'm working on by myself. So I needed something basically smaller, a little more lightweight, and easy to configure. And I thought about what I wanted while I was eating lunch. Right out there, little steps. I wanted to be able to pull CSS files from any server, not just the server that the build tool lived on. I didn't want it to work at runtime, so I didn't want this to be happening as the page is compiling, you know, loading for the client. I wanted this to happen, something I could call manually, or I could set it to automatically run as a cron job, so a little time job. And just because I like HTTP requests, I wanted it to work through HTTP so that I didn't always have to access the command line. So, because I thought to myself, this is just one little problem, right? If I'm trying to create a bunch of CSS files together, just sort of minimizing them and concatenating them is one problem that's part of a bigger whole. I wanted to be able to do this eventually with JavaScript and other things, and I wanted to be able to have a single tool that could do it, and I just like HTTP requests. They're my friend, so I thought, okay, we'll make it work that way. So basically, I wrote CSS Maker. It's a simple PHP script, and here's my third grade animation to show you how it works. So it's just a simple PHP file. It's like 70 lines. you call it with an HTTP request. It takes two parameters. One is a secret key, just so that bots and other malicious, nasty people out on the internet don't just start building your CSS files for you when you feel like it. You don't really need that, but you know. And you send it a path for whatever project it is that you're trying to build CSS for. And it goes out to that path and it looks for a JSON file. JSON's a hot topic this year. And that JSON file is just a manifest that says, here's the order and the URL of every CSS file I want to include. And then it just goes out and it fetches those CSS files and it starts building this styles.css file in that project folder. Now, for my OPAC, instead of calling 6 different CSS files, I can actually just call that one styles.css, and it's going to include all of these CSS files in the order that I specified them in the JSON. So it's manually controlled by me. I can, if I do an update to a CSS, or if I know that some CSS is updated, I can just do a quick, I have a little bookmarklet on my computer that I click, and it just prompts me for the path and everything else, and it just kind of runs. So I can manually update it when I change the CSS, but I also have it set to do a cron job every month, just because the web team is constantly updating their CSS, and I want to pull in those new feeds as well as vendor stuff. So it's sort of a more lightweight version of automatic, semi-automatic CSS file minimization and concatenation, just to help improve performance a little bit. And we're kind of testing it out on the catalog right now, and it's working pretty well, actually. You can get it. It's on GitHub, Css Maker. Thanks. Any questions about that?
You just go back one slide.
Mm-hmm. Oop. Yeah. So actually, here at GVSU, we built GitHub into our deployment process, so we can't deploy unless it goes through GitHub. So every piece of code is up there, which unfortunately means that we don't have perfect readme through everything. I'm sorry, but we're working on that. By we, I mean me. All right. Thank you very much. Ready? All right. So now we have.
Do you have a
dongle? Yep, right here. I'll leave it plugged in for you.
So now, how can we hear him?
Boy, that's a good question. I bet we can plug in some fancy audio.
Yeah, because
More gizmos. Got audio. You want to plug it into your speaker out. So you might need to set your system preferences, your displays to mirror. Yep, there we go. Okay, and Kristen, can I borrow you for a second? Or Aaron, one of the two? Do you know how to operate the... Okay.
Can you hear me, Steve?
Okay, we're plugged in, but I don't know how to get... Are you in the speaker jack?
You are. Hold on a second. We are trying to fix the audio. So.
It's not really my space.
Morning, Aaron.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
I'll have to take a look. How many of us will it take to get this to work?
Just to get the audio.
Hey, Steve. Good, good.
We can make a phone call to the next one.
We should be,
Hold on. Let's see if we can.
we should be able to.
Yeah, it's just like 80% here, right?
Yeah, but for some reason it's not picking up the headphones jack for that.
Oh.
Quite all the way in.
How about now?
How about now?
Oh, there we go. It's coming through, but we need to crank it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's getting better. It's getting better. Don't worry.
Check his volume once the headphones are in.
Back again.
Steve?
I can say lots of things.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
You
fine.
guys here okay?
Okay.
All right.
Let me do a little bit of an introduction and then you can fly by.
Great.
So, good morning. My name is Eric Echeverry and I work at the University of Michigan in the Library Incubation and Technology Group. We are basically what we do is a lot of Java, Ruby, whatever it comes into a shop. And one of the most interesting projects that we have had so far is the Open Badges initiative for the digital badges. Steve Lund, which is the person that is going to introduce you to what we have done at the University of Michigan, is the kind of the lead developer into the other departments. So in other words, he's not a programmer, but he's the person that has the knowledge and has the how to we can get into different programs. One of the big challenges that we had is that we had to be up and running in 2 months. So for that, that was a really challenging programming, and we spent a lot of hours, but finally we are like, I'm gonna go myself. I'm gonna go through the programming part, and Steve is gonna go through the Open Badges initiative. So I think that's it, Steve. Go ahead.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi everyone. Like Eric said, my name is Steve Lon. Let me actually screen share the slides here. Sure it's the right thing. Alright, can you guys all see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect.
Alright, cool. So like Eric said, so I am not a developer. I'm essentially an educational researcher. My title's down there, it's long and crazy. But basically, this is a research project that we got a grant for, and in a span of a couple months, Eric and his team were able to stand up the system, and they've been working on it ever since, and it's going great. So this is just a very quick kind of overview of that project. So there's a slightly modified version of the slides. I just tweeted it too, and they're available on SlideShare. Some quick acknowledgements. We have a big team of folks. Eric's group is down there, not intentionally by order, but they're down there as part of the Library Learning Technologies Education Group. And this project basically started because if you Google anything online right now about a STEM workforce shortage, you'll get tons of these kind of infographics that graduates today just don't have the kind of skills that employers are looking for. They have kind of these, they have a lot of technical knowledge, don't necessarily have the other skills they're looking for. And those skills are often talked about as 21st century skills, things like teamwork, leadership, diversity knowledge or cross-cultural awareness, entrepreneurial mindset. Those kind of skills are really lacking, and they really don't find a way to be able to students don't find a way to very well talk about those skills with employers when they're meeting with them. So our pilot was with this group in engineering here in Michigan. It's called Msm Academies. They're a college transition program. They just started their 7th year. Those incoming freshmen are actually on campus right now. So their overarching goal is to increase the number of students pursuing and graduating with STEM degrees. But they also want students to provide students with the competencies acquired outside of the traditional classroom setting and integrate those knowledges with classroom knowledge. And students, like I said, students often have problems articulating their skills and experiences with recruiters and employers at situations like this, which is one of our big career fairs on campus. So put another way, students have these experiences, you can see in the top right of that slide, working with kids, doing community service projects, all sorts of different experiences, and they have problems gaining recognition and connecting those co-curricular learning experiences with the curricular and communicating that learning with employers. Digital badges come in because they present this unique opportunity to bring the worlds of reflection, validation, and evidence together. It's really where those three pieces come together where digital badges can make a difference. Essentially what we're doing is we're providing a process of making learning visible and validated. So the validation piece is really important. And we're doing that by digitally transforming these. This is familiar to a lot of folks. Those are Boy Scout badges. We're transforming those into these. These are a very quick collection of digital badges. And I love this graphic. This was created by Kyle Bowen, who's now at Penn State University. And the cool thing about digital badges that's a little different than physical badges that military, Boy Scouts, and others have had over years is that they carry with them all this metadata. When you click on a digital badge, you can see not only its name and where it came from, but a description, the actual criteria, the evidence along with it, the date issued, meta tags, all this stuff. And that is incredibly powerful because it's not just I can grab an image off the web and stick it on a resume, because when someone clicks on it, it's going to show, oh, that's actually awarded to this person at this time for this purpose. And when I click on it, I can actually see that evidence. That's really powerful. And that process, it's not a straightforward process necessarily. So it has many steps, as you can see by this kind of crossways. But if I start in the top left, you basically have an earner. This earner could be a student, it could be yourselves, it could be professional development. Whoever that person kind of doing the work is an earner. They view the criteria, they decide to apply for a badge or not. They might reflect on what that criteria is. They might either gather existing evidence they have, or maybe create the evidence, or do what's required for that badge. Provide that evidence to a reviewer. In our case, the reviewers are actually staff members that are also academic coaches for the students, but they could also be peers, they could be other third-party folks, whoever those reviewers are. And then if that evidence meets the criteria, then they review and if it does not meet the criteria, and that evidence, then the reviewer kind of reviews and resubmits, goes through that cycle. If it does meet the criteria, then we go and issue the badge. And the earner can decide within our system whether or not to kind of keep it in the system where it's kind of a closed system, or they can decide to share that badge publicly via the Mozilla Open Badges backpack. So we're leveraging that infrastructure, which allows students not only to take the badges we're awarding, but also badges they might get through another third party, badges they got through Cities of Learning opportunities in Chicago and other cities in the country. And those badges can then be shared through a variety of venues in social media and other places using the Mozilla backpack. So very quickly, we got initial funding, like I said, last September, almost a year ago now. So we very quickly got that grant. I started looking for developers and got paired up with the LTIC group, which is Eric. He's going to talk more about the technical infrastructure, but they basically use Ruby on Rails and Agile development to stand up the system very quickly. But from our end, we needed to know, what do we actually badge? So about the same time we got the grant, we met with the Employers Council for Engineering, and they brainstormed a whole list of skills that you probably can't read because that slide has really tiny type. But these are a whole variety of things, everything from foreign languages to GPA progression to listening, team skills, all this kind of stuff, some of which kind of translates to these 21st century skills. At the same time, we also ran a series of student focus groups asking them, okay, we know what's on your transcript. If you wanted to get recognition for anything else, we did here at the University of Michigan, we're a fairly large campus, we have a lot of stuff going on, as many universities do. So how could we get recognition for all of those? And then how might we take all those experiences you're kind of brainstorming on sticky notes here, and ramp those, collapse those into these broad categories. And we also drew inspiration, students receive this kind of card, this two-sided, when they get here on campus for Msm Academies. And on one side is these values like character, responsibility to family, and individual excellence. On the other side, it's really hard to read in this picture, but there's these characteristics, and these include exhibits intellectual curiosity, values community and social service, has a diverse and knowledgeable worldview, came up with 8 categories to begin our pilot last winter. And these are them. And we hired a graphic designer and designed a bunch of badges. So here they are. You can't read them very quickly. They include community service, social experiences, entrepreneurial mindset, ethics, intellectual curiosity, leadership, professional development, and science and energy and research. But not only did we want to get breadth, we also wanted to talk about depth within each of these categories. So some of you may have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. This is a taxonomy that Benjamin Bloom put forward back in the 50s and was revised by Anderson several years later. We used that revised taxonomy. And this is a way to show the depth, but also letting students kind of take their initial experience and apply it and take it further. So we kind of call the beginner category or beginner level, understanding and remembering, just kind of exposure that area, then actually applying it and be able to analyze one experience from another is intermediate. Then they actually take those experiences, actually modify, create, or do new experiences and evaluate different experiences is what we call the advanced level. We also wanted students to take more ownership of the badges, and we wanted to be somewhat different. We didn't want to just be, Michigan digital badges or just digital badges at Michigan. That sounded a little too vanilla for us. So we had a naming competition, and we had about 110 student nominations for names, and then they voted on them, and they came up with Emblem. And you can go to our website right now, it's emblem.uminster.edu, and there's some more information on that website. And we like this name because it's emblematic of the kinds of learning experiences that you can achieve here in Michigan. So, like I said, we had an initial pilot. It was only with 58 freshmen, so it's a fairly small pilot population. This was just one in winter. So we launched the system back in January. And we had pre and post service, focus group, badge evidence submitted on the system, as well as analytics on the system. We asked about familiarity with digital badges. Most students were not familiar at all. And the likelihood they would actually apply for our badge was all over the map for those 58 students. So some were not very likely, and some were kind of middle of the road. We'll see what happens. Here's some of the system requirements we had initially, and Eric will talk more about these in a second here. This includes review and badge criteria for our levels. So we wanted the system to be fairly open once you were in a program. So within the Msm Academies program, everyone can see the criteria for any badge, even if they can't apply for it. We also said that once a badge is awarded, everyone else in the system can view that badge. So we'll talk about what that view looks like in a second. We also wanted hidden badges available. So these are badges that the advisors or the program can award that students may not know about, but something that students do things that maybe they don't realize they can get recognition for. So we wanted the ability to do that. We wanted to integrate with our single sign-on that we have here in Michigan, and also integrate with the Open Badges backpack from Mozilla. So this is the system. It's actually gone through a little bit of a UI change, and we're doing a UI review right now. So that's still going on. So this launched again in January. So all levels, the awardees and their evidence, and the number of applicants are visible to all members of the learning community. So I can click on any of these badges as a student and view the criteria, even though I can only apply for the beginner ones to begin with. So this is what one of the badges looks like when you're applying for it. This is an intermediate badge. It's across social experiences. And the criteria includes examples, required evidence, and reflection prompts. Some digital badges out there in the universe will just be awarded for something like participation or passing a test or passing some sort of qualification. Kind of like the same thing that if you get certified to be a Microsoft developer, that's a certificate, you pass an exam, here's your badge. These badges are a little bit more reflective, so not only do we want students to upload things or say like here I am, or here's an attendance sheet, I did this thing, or these series of things, but also I want to reflect upon it and see how does it connect not only with my co-curricular learning, my curricular learning, and kind of see how I see myself as an engineer. And again, everyone within the program can see other people's evidence. It's all public to that community, and then it's up to each individual earner to decide whether or not to export that to the Mozilla backpack. So this is a badge that was awarded to someone. They earned it by, looks like they got a science management research badge by participating in our undergraduate research opportunities program, otherwise known as UROP. You can kind of see that evidence real quick. And then again, we talked about pushing to the Mozilla Open Badges backpack. Here's some examples where the backpack can go. So here's a badge we awarded to Steve, or Steve's demo account, the first badge. And I can push that to Facebook, I can push that to LinkedIn, portfolio, to resumes.
I have no idea what that is.
Someone's inviting someone.
Okay, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. All right. So, really quick, and again, this is on SlideShare, so I'm not going to dwell on the numbers too much, but we did have 27 applied for badges. The students went through the whole process that I talked earlier. Those are 11 special awarded badges. So these, we have 2 badge categories. One called Msm Representative, where students are representatives of the program and identified that way, and also students who do some sort of work that's kind of a legacy towards the program. So those were awarded as well to the kind of other 8 categories we talked about. This finding I just want to talk about real quick from a qualitative and, give you some data. So we asked students how useful they thought badges would be in supporting future conversations with employers, and it's mixed. The value proposition still is fairly new, so digital badges are still kind of a new thing for a lot of students. So some students kind of bought in right away that badges will allow for more clear and detailed discussion when they talk with employers. And everyone said emblems or digital badges are not universally known. So if employers actually know what digital badges are, then they don't have to spend their time explaining what a digital badge is. So we're actually reaching out to all the recruiters that are coming to campus this fall and giving them information about what digital badges are ahead of when students actually see them. So they'll actually know that we have about 300 Msm Academies students, and they should be asking them, where are their badges? So we've actually just turned on the emblem system to all students in Msm Academies. That's around 300 engineering students. There's about another 150 in other programs as well. And we're also now actively working, now that we have support for multiple programs within the emblem system. We're talking with folks like Library Instruction, who does a whole series of workshops and other opportunities. The housing has a digital literacy project. Up here on North Campus in Michigan, we have Digital Media Commons, where it includes things like 3D Lab, multimedia studios, that there do already some existing streaming, so converting that into digital badges, and then also partnering with other universities as well. So, sorry for all the slides. I hope that didn't take too long.
That's okay.
Take some questions or turn it over to Eric at this point.
Just a question about the awarding of the badges. The team that manages that process, do they have a rubric they use, and who makes up the approval committee or whatever?
Yeah, so this is that process again. So the folks in the kind of orange there, the reviewers, our reviewers right now are the 3 academic coaches for the Msm Academies, but for that program. But essentially anyone in the system can be either an earner or a reviewer or an approver, that kind of thing. So we could, you can envision a time as it scales up that you might set it up so that students who earn a intermediate or advanced level badge can then start awarding beginner level badges to their peers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Please, another question here, Steve. Yeah, I just had a question. I know it's early in the project, but how do you guys envision testing the success of it as it sort of grows? You know, you had sort of a really small pilot, and as it grows, do you have an idea of how you're going to assess it to see if it's an effective program that
The
you're going to keep
assessment's
resources
at multiple
to?
levels, because in some ways the assessment's at the program level as well. So what does success look like for that program? It might be number of batches awarded, it might be number of different students, it might be the depth of learning. So how many students kind of go all the way to an advanced level, or the kinds of experience. In some ways, I see it almost as an individual success story for each student. So are they able to actually use the badges to get where they're, so we talked about expectancy value theory a lot in educational and psychological research. So what do the students expect? Where is their end goal, and do the badges allow them to achieve that goal? And because badges can be used in a variety of ways, those goals are multi-value. So it could be getting an internship, getting a good letter of recommendation from a faculty member for graduate school. It could be doing an internship or a final job out there in the world. So lots of different ways that these badges can be used and assessed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve, thank you so much. Now let me get them confused with the programming, and thank you for, for your clear explanation. I will see you at home then.
All right, sounds good. I can stand alone.
It's gone. Okay. So one of the so this is the web, this is the site, but actually, as you see, that's the beta site. So I'm gonna work on the beta site for a little bit. Now, one of the difficult parts that I found out from the universities that I talked to, which was Seton Hall University and another university in California, they told me that they were not able to do the batch export into the Mozilla backpack. So that's the part that I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what I did in there with the other programmers. Mostly I was the one that did most of the development, but so let me show you a little bit of that. So what happened is that when you log in as a student, so when you log in as a student, then assume that the person that are in charge of assigning badges to you, they have already assigned a badge to you for upload to the Mozilla backpack. So what we did is we did an interface with the backpack in such a way that when the student click in this badge, so he's going to export that badge into the Mozilla backpack. There is an URL that refer to the backpack, and there is a direct interface with the Mozilla integration. Here I'm using the sign up from Mozilla, which is the universal one. And so in here, what I'm doing is communicating already with the Mozilla backpack. In this case, he's telling me that I already had that badge in the backpack. So we will look at my backpack in a second, but one of the important things that I discovered while I was doing this development was that you can use their integration, so you can, you don't have to do all this development. In other words, you don't have to recheck if you have digital badges in the backpack. They will do it for you as long as you communicate with them, as long as you are able to establish that link with them. But let me send one of the badges, so you will see it on the backpack. Let me send probably this one. So if that badge is not on the backpack, they will come back and they will tell you, okay, you are going to ask for those badges. Here is the criteria and here is the issuer. And those ones are referring to your the University of Michigan server. So everything is done based out of secure certificates on your servers. So when you click in here and you say yes, that badge has gone to the backpack, and then you should be able to show it in Facebook or wherever you want to show it. So now here is the backpack, and as you see, one of those should be the one that I just exported into that. On the backpack you can have collections and all that, and so you can arrange everything in a pretty fashion. I have not done that, but you can arrange that so you can send that link to your potential employers or to people who wants to know about your abilities or the skills for doing that. So that's one thing. Now, all these exports, let's talk a little bit more about programming, which is all these exports require JSON objects. So those JSON objects live in the server, in the University of Michigan server, and that's how the digital or the security is done. In other words, when you are exporting that badge, there is a request from the Mozilla backpack or from whoever is the organization that is looking at your digital badge, and there is a GET request to verify that all these URLs and all these exist in your host. So if you click in this host, they come and check out that is the University of Michigan, and the name, the criteria, the issue, and the image, and all of that has to live on the server. So, and the way that you do that is by creating JSON objects into your. Let me show you a JSON object. That's how a JSON object looks like. That's the same object that you are seeing, on the URL. That I'm using a library which is called Rabel, the RABL. So I'm using this library. Should be here, someplace. Like that. So I'm using that library to be able to construct those JSON objects in an easy way. So once that I figured out how to construct the JSON object, it was pretty easy just to follow the Mozilla Open Badges specification, which is this one. They have the Open Badges specification, so you construct all those objects that you were seeing on the URL. You start constructing what is on black in here. That means that it's a required field. What is not is just you can put it on or you cannot. But that's basically part of the stuff that the universities in California could not do. So then I talked to them and I said, I had the code and I should be able to to share it with you. So that's the part that I have been focusing primarily, and that I'm very interested on. So that's basically a little bit of an overview of what we have right now. It's an excellent project. A year ago when I came in here, I was very new in Rails, in Ruby, but it's a really, I like the programming in Ruby by itself. It's very intuitive, and so it has allowed us to to be more productive and more progressive as we go into the project. So I think that for now that's all that I have to show you. We are going to release this as an open source. So if the universities are interested, we can. I came in here looking more for a partnership on working in badges. And so if there is any interest, we can work with some of the universities, and then we can put you up to speed. I work with a really good group of programmers, and I think that that we can do a lot of magic. And so that's it for now. Any questions? I told you that I was gonna get you confused, guys. That's why I brought it still long.
I have a question.
Yep.
So a lot of course management systems are starting to incorporate digital badges, credentials, and things like that. Achievements like Blackboard, for example, integrates with the Mozilla for Badges project. What do you think the future potentially would be for badges at U of M as far as it integrates with classroom experiences for students?
There we go. So we had I forgot to tell you this, but one of the things that we had a meeting with the Mozilla Foundation with two persons from California. They came into the university, and then they told us that they are building a sort of Word document, but it's a Word document, but it works on the web, and it's able to validate this kind of the digital badges. So one of the things that we were looking at, and one of the interests that has, for some of the professors, is to be able, like for example, if I take a Ruby class, I should be able to have that class, put it in my resume, once that I finish my class, and then a potential employer should be able to see that. So not only that, if a professor is looking for someone who wants to research into a little bit more of Ruby, so he should be able to get it from that. So there's a lot of interest actually, and it's new, and I think that we will see where we get. As I say, I'm just at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm the programmer. So anyway, let's see, no more questions. Okay, thank you.
Take a little mid-morning break, get some more coffee, some more carbs. Restroom through the door. So I just sort of slapped the main thing into All right. Ready to go? I guess that didn't work. I'll try again. Hi, everyone. All right, we're back from our mid-morning break. I hope everybody's having a good time. Still coffee. Don't forget to drink some of that. And now we're going to hear Cole talk to us a little bit about digital collections and APIs and fun things.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Cole Hudson. I am a librarian at Wayne State University in Detroit, and I'm here to talk about digital collections and Fedora Commons, which we use with our digital collections, and the API and stuff we built around that infrastructure. So when I started about 2 years ago, as a part of a digital publishing team, we were tasked with fixing our digital collections, and that our current digital collections are kind of aging out. They look about 90s-tastic, and we wanted to fix that. And so we decided to basically just change out the infrastructure we have and implement something new. And so this platform, which we have since released in beta, is built on Fedora Commons for our object management, Solar for our indexing of all the metadata. It's a great indexer and search. Users, we really code in Python, and we don't use Allendale, which is another good program, digital collections and digital object repository. Disconnected. Whoa, something said disconnected. I don't know what that is. And we don't use Drupal, so. And they're great solutions, but for us, they didn't work. And so the issue we had there was, well, we have these three components, and now we got to build our connectors. Now we have to make sure they all work together and play nice. And that's where you see a lovely slide like this, which was very handy on Flickr. And so our problem was we needed to find ways to connect together our indexer Solar with our objects, so all that XML metadata that we put into Fedora can go over to Solar so people can get to it. And then when this is just some stuff I found and put into an editor. And I assure you our code now is much less gibberish. And what it does is it connects up a Solar index, like I said, with our Fedora Commons instance. And it allows us to do more complex queries, because when you start querying things like relationships, okay, well, is this picture a part of a larger collection, or okay, this is the back picture of a chair, okay, and that's actually related to the chair itself. You know, all these kinds of connections built through RDF that you find in Fedora, we wanted to be able to query those and figure those things out too. And so we had to build some type of little front end or some type of middleware code to actually manage this. And also, with an API, it allows us to kind of cap access to our back-end system. If the only way you can get data is through the API, then you can't go and query Solar or query Fedora, which have their own respective APIs built in. And so that, you know, that allowed us to do things like prevent people from deleting things or prevent people from modifying things that we had. So, because, you know, usually you don't want the public to really delete your objects. So this is a bit of a chart which hopefully you can see, and it kind of shows our setup. We have our lightweight front end that we built. It's at digital.library.wayne.edu. It's beta, so if you guys want to look at it while I'm talking, or if you get bored, feel free to peruse. And so that has a collection of different functionalities that we have, including search, browse, all the different collections, so on and so forth. And then we have on our back end, we have our digital object repository, Fedora, and Solar. And so we had to build in this middleware, which right now consists of our API that allows us to query things and put it on the front end, as well as middleware kind of functions, keeping things in sync between the two, handling things like ingest, and putting moving data about. And we use this middleware that we have affectionately called Auroboros. If you know anything about mythology, it refers to this world serpent that encompasses the world. And since we built everything in Python, we thought it was slightly clever. But I'm not going to be talking about the entire infrastructure, only probably the green part, which is just the API, the way we get things to show on our page. And so let's look a bit at the history. So I have an excellent chart here, which I thought I could use Google Draw, and then I decided I could do something better with a little bit of text. And kind of shows where we started. When we started, we had never built an API. We just knew we wanted to go and plump things onto a web page because we were tired of doing really complex queries because they were a real pain to write. And so what we did was we used things we knew. And we knew we wanted to at least write the back-end API functions in Python, which we're good at. And we knew that we could go and query things using PHP. So what we did at first was we wrote a little PHP file that we'd go hit, and it would go and route it over to our Python functions. And that worked for a while. We could pass AJAX calls if anyone's used Jquery. The way you go and you can interact asynchronously with APIs is through something called AJAX calls. And we could pass those to these series of functions that would hit our PHP layer. And there's some problems passing data. When you go from language to language, you get fun things to deal with. And we decided we got tired of that after a while. It worked, but we could do better. So we then evolved to using just pure Python. And we first tried out using Django. And the problem was we weren't very conversant with Django. And the first thing we did was fail miserably by going and writing a little connector in Django that, you could pass a request to the Django app and it would process everything and bring you your data back and show it on the web page, and that was great. But then you would go and try to run something like, let's go and ingest 50 pictures into our Fedora Commons instance, and it would just kill the front end. And we weren't conversant enough to know why that didn't work. And so, we eventually figured that out, but by then we had already moved on, and we moved on to using a server called Twisted. So Twisted is basically a server built in Python that handles lots of asynchronous calls. So you can go and hit it with all kinds of requests and calls, and it will just run like a pro. And that's exactly what we were looking for. So eventually what we did was we passed all those functions, or we passed all those requests through Twisted, and it hit these 2 files of functions. And that was great and everything, but eventually, we thought we could do better. So we did, and then we decided to organize our code from 2 pages of functions to an actual app. So currently we are putting things in Flask, which is a micro framework, which is built in Python because we like Python. And it's kind of organized everything. It's organized our API, it's organized our backware management, and everything's funneled through Twisted. So, the lessons we learned right there is, you got to start with what you know, and you're not going to really get you're going to get a product that works, but eventually, it's going to break. And the thing we're dealing with right now is we have a bit of cruft that is from remnants of PHP, dealing with passing data. And, and basically you go and deal with those things. One of the great things about Flask is it handles URLs nicely, so you don't have to pass it anything funky. It'll work as long as you give it a clean URL and you've specified what you want to do with that. So let's look a bit at how it works. As you can see here, we'll have a link that I'll click in a second, and in its base form, we're going and hitting our URL, and it's basically hitting a place called WC API, and you specify what functions you want to pass it. And these functions go and give corresponding responses. For example, if you want to find all the objects, that is all the things we have in a collection, we could say, well, let's find everything that is the member of the collection ebooks. And so we've done that in one simple response, and what that's going to go do is going to go do a complex search on the back end in Python, whereas before we would have to have done a lot longer of a query. So we have a long document right here, and feel free to peruse if you want. This is at digital.library, and it's so and so forth/wiki, and that's all for you to look at as well. And we have a series of functions that we built into our API. And like I said, this manages the display onto our front end. For example, if we wanted to go and actually query Fedora, there's a nice way you can do with the Fedora API to get the status of an object. And so we've done just that with a single function call, which we have named getObjectXML, but we should probably rename that because that doesn't make as much sense. And then also there are a series of complex calls. So one of the things you get with Fedora Commons is you can organize things using RDF. You can organize relationships. Things can be members of other things, members of collections, parts of this, parts of that. And sometimes, you want to go leverage that data. And the way you can do that is through a database they have, Mulgera database. And they have a way to go and query that. And those queries are very nice, but they're a little bit complex when you have to write them 1,000 times. So it's much easier to go and put them into one little handy dandy function call. And for example, if we wanted to see, for example, if you give it a child object, it will return PID when you say function equals is member of. So for example, let's say we have a chair and we have pictures of chairs in our digital collections. And in these lovely chairs, there are multiple pictures of them. There's a front picture of the chair, there's a back view, there's a side view, there's another side view, and it's a great looking chair. And sometimes you'll say, okay, well, here's a picture, and you give it the side view, and it'll tell you, hey, actually there are other pictures here. This is part of a larger object. So, this larger object is a chair in its full glory, and so you can figure that out with a simple call here. Another one would be seeing what type of collection is part of. We have multiple collections. Sometimes we want to know if something is part of our ebook collection or if something's part of our automotive collection. And so you can query those. Another one shows siblings, and as well as different data streams. For example, we use mods to describe the data we have in there, and a quick way to pull up the mods data stream for any object is to ask for it and say Fedora mods and give it an ID, what we call a PID, and there you go. You got some mods. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned here is everything we get back returns in everyone's favorite data package, Json. And so I'll show you some of that data. Let's see what we can get here. Okay, yeah, so we have mods data, and this is just poured over into a viewer so it's easier to read. And it gives all of our mods back in JSON form. And then we have many, many more. Now, another thing is what we can do. We built in different searches here. We have built in different ways to get favorites. So we have ways for people to log in and favorite different collections. And so we have built into our API all this usage. And there are ways to go and concatenate different functions. So for example, let's see, if you want to, let's see if we can get that here. Oh, no, I didn't grab the whole URL. So everything that actually renders this picture and this page is contained within one API call. Oh. It's right there. Yeah, so this is the showing everything that we need to make this page work. We have to tell whether or not it's available. We have to tell it, we have to get different mods information back from it, as well as what collection it's a part of. And we use all that JSON, we parse it, and we have ourselves a picture of Edwin in the rumble seat of a Packard coupe. And some different things to know that we learned about it, I kind of want to share is, we really built this because we had a need. We were tired of writing complex queries and needed a quick way to go and write and then simplify them. And it's gone through a lot of iterations. We've gradually made it better. And we had never built an API before, so anyone who's probably had formal experience is probably looking at it and going, this is all wrong. But it works for us. And another thing is we had the time to build this is because we had an existing digital collections platform. The thing that we are replacing still exists because we haven't migrated everything over, so that afforded us some leeway. We're still developing on it, so to speak, and it's Well, it's challenging because we've gone through a lot of iterations, but it's a lot of fun. That's really about it. If you want to look at it, it's on our GitHub. And thank you. Any questions? Yes.
What were you using to display the image on that record? Was it OpenSeaDragon or?
Where?
On the, yeah.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is OpenSeaDragon. Yeah. One of the things we had to do, actually, that brings a good point back, is we had to figure out a quick way to actually display that because OpenSeaDragon needs an actual path. And when you try to pass it a URL that you get from Fedora, it does not like that. So we had to make an API call which would actually give it a path and figure out where the Fedora object was residing in a data store. So you have to do a little bit of decoding. If you dealt with Fedora much, the data is all in this data store, and they have the way it's organized is through this hash, MD5 hash, that they've done, and so you have to decrypt that basically, and go and plunk it into a space that CDragon can get to. Yes.
Have you used Mogara or the triple store functionality for anything other than like the structure of collections?
Like, is there something you'd be getting at? No.
No.
Nothing comes to mind other than collections.
Well, I guess I only say that because I've heard of other people using Mogara to kind of put some linked data into the triple store that's not the collection structure. But
no, we haven't, but that sounds awesome. We need to. And I'll let you know if we do.
Or if you hear of anyone doing.
Or if you hear anyone doing, we'll see what they're doing. Other questions? Yeah.
The perpetually, the question I always ask when I see projects like this is, how many folks do you have working on this, and how long have you been working on it?
2 people. This has been around for about since for a year, and it's it's something we've developed fairly extensively on because it comprises the main functionality that we lacked when we installed Fedora and Solar separately as opposed to in a more coherent form. And so, things I haven't talked about would be all the back-end functionality that we had to build in as opposed to this front end. And we have worked with a developer in the past year to get the front end. So it's been it's been a good focus over time. Good, thank you. Any other questions? Anything? No? Okay, well, thank you very much.
There you go. Oh, we'll find out. Do you want me to take this down? Once complete year, remember how this app's
Connected to mobile device.
No thanks.
Disconnected.
All right, now we see if I can, the function key actually works that. Oh, hey, except it's on the wrong desktop. Joys of Linux. Let's see if this works. All right, give me a second. This is always a problem. I like working with a ton of multiple desktops. Unfortunately, he never quite knows which ones to display. Let's see if we can get good.
there we go. Kind of. Good enough. Hi, I'm John Gorman. I'm from the University of Illinois, and kind of motive for this talk was that nobody signed up for a presentation on the wiki. So I thought last year, when I came to Code4Lib Midwest, I had a lot of conversations with people with, well, how do you develop, what are some of the things like at your library? And in a lot of breakout sessions, there was questions like that, discussions, and it's a really wide range of people doing different things with different technologies. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about stuff I've learned over the years for working for a library. So what's my background and actually qualified to talk to you guys? Well, I don't really know, but I'm going to talk to you guys anyhow. But so my background is I have an undergraduate degree in computer science, but I always really liked libraries. So, I did the very forward, progressive, money-making things of just getting a master's degree in library and information science as well. But it's the job I love, so it's good. I started at the University of Illinois. Primarily what I was doing was writing queries against 4-Hers, so things like, how many books circulate in this location, things like that. That's my introduction to a very, very weird world of library iOS systems that looked like they were written in 1990 to cover up a system written in 1980, which is pretty much what happened. Right now, what I'm doing as far as my actual job duties, I actually split between 2 units because both units fought for me, and so I just split my time in half in administration. So I'm working with the server support group. We call it IMS, Infrastructure Management Support. I also work for a software development group. Historically, software development group has been kind of strange at the library. And what we call the main library IT unit, which was merged with our engineering library IT, we had a tendency in the main library IT group to do a lot of individual projects. We'd be assigned a project, we maybe collaborate with one other person. The engineering library had a better track record of larger group projects, mostly because they had grant funding. Main library IT didn't. So most of my experience has been working by myself or with one other person. So what are some of the things that drive me forward as a program? I've always liked the 3 virtues that Larry Wall has. In his Code cookbook, I believe it is, he had 3 virtues of a program: laziness, impatience, and hubris. My favorite one is laziness. Now, he's not saying me write sloppy code and push things out. It's kind of a play on words. His point is most really good programmers are kind of lazy in a way. They don't want to have to do the same thing over and over again. We get trapped in computers because we're like, oh, hey, I never have to do this again. I can just write this program, and it'll do it for me. And so all we ever do is look at new problems. And sometimes we're like, well, I could do this in 20 minutes, or I could spend 3 hours, but like really cool program to do it. And maybe I can share it with someone else. I'm sure I'll have to write it again, right? So laziness is a very good virtue, and it's something I kind of try to strive for. And recently, while thinking about laziness, I've been looking at some projects I've done in the past, and it's like, I still get requests for tweaks and logic and things like that, where people are kind of like, well, we really like it, but it turns out, we need something special for this group, or something special for that group. And it ends up being a lot of little tweaks, a lot of little rules, and then I get an email, and it's like, oh, well, we really need this changed in an hour to allow this AD group to access this as well, and I'm kind of I'm talking an hour. That was my email during the break. So what I thought what I'm trying to do lately is I've been playing around with rule engines. So the idea is you can move out as much of the logic of who can access something, or what should be, when routing an item, what are the rules that should actually have to be accepted to the new location. And so I don't have to go in and change code. They just go into an interface and they change that. And the rule engine is a really nice way for me to program with that. Now I'm going to show you, or at least try, if you will see, projectors and me are not always friends. But I have a very, very horrible piece of PHP code. my lame excuse is that I was basically approached, they said we're doing a massive shift to high density storage, and we're getting a lot of items that are just really wonky. Voyager doesn't have a way to really say that these are states and information, how the items should be set up before going to this location. Can you write some sort of script that can do that, and can you do it in 2 days? So I was like, I go, sure, I'll write a PHP script, and I just threw out a very simple PHP script. They only have like 3 conditions at the time, right? Well, you know, years go by, and you're like, oh, well, we kind of want to allow books type 2 in there. We've added more location to the high density storage, so now it's separate location. And so what ended up happening, I've only taken a snippet out of it. Let's see, is this the right one? I'm still getting used to some of the changes in Unity. Let's look for the ugliness. I can see the ugliness from here. Can people read that? This is just a snippet. I just took it out of the yet larger if block that had been added to over the years, and I thought, this is insane. I can't keep doing this. And so essentially what this does is it checks for each location if it's an item type that can actually be allowed into that location. I decided I'm never writing this again. So I yanked that out. It gave me an excuse to go and play with a rule engine because I got another set of requests. So I'm embarrassed by it. I don't really like to admit that's my code, but that was my code. And also another problem is testing it is really hard because it's really easy to make some sort of subtle mistake that still, it runs, but then they're calling you like, oh, well, how did this item type creep in? It's like, oh yeah, I forgot an OR there. Oops. So what I found was I was poking around rule engines. A lot of them were scary and intimidating. I found one for PHP called Ruler, which is on GitHub. Pretty quick, pretty simple. It's a small library, and what this rule engine essentially does is all logical operators like O and they're objects, and you build these objects up, and then a rule can contain another rule, and it can contain another rule. You basically build a tree that's like a logical operation. You can almost imagine it as like an SQL where a statement where you have an and then a nested and then a nested and. The nice thing there is it let me. I basically made a domain-specific language. What I did was took out emails the librarians were already sending me, and I just made it so it understood those emails. They would essentially do something that was usually like, well, the STOS location, comma, the map Oak Street location will accept book 2, book 3. And I thought, why not just let them do that? So I dumped out an example of it here. This is actually code because I didn't dare try to do a live access. Here, I pretty much just saved the result when they take their little domain-specific language up there, which is pretty much based off, again, the set of emails you already send me. They can just go in and type in there. At some point, if I had more time to be nice, free graphical interface, maybe with boxes they can drag, drop, but I have about 12 projects I'm working on, so this works. And what they can do is they can click edit, they'll edit a little bit. This button here, make production result production, that only shows after they hit a button that says test this. And what this test is basically it takes a random location item type, so it can be. We have 600 locations and about 30 item types, so odds are it should always be a failure just from random luck. But down here in the bottom, what I also then do is I go through all the locations that were mentioned, and I check to see what types, and I go through all the types. That's a much smaller subset. That's only like, a couple hundred combinations. And then, so they can look through this list, and they can see that kind of what they expected to happen. And then so what essentially happens is that these processes somewhere scan about code that shows there's a little web app that check all these other statuses, and then converting more of this stuff to the rule engine. If people really, really want to see the code, I can show that briefly, but I'm going to be quite brief because the trade-off here is this isn't necessarily less code for me compared to what was there before. Before was a lot of statements. This is a little bit more complicated, but this has, as far as it's much easier to test because I can do the thing like I did before where I just take this rule, I just run it through all these combinations, and I can start adding more rules that at some point they're like, well, we want to make this even more complicated. Instead of playing out if then else statements, I can just start modifying my parser engine. What I have is something I take in that test string, break that apart into an array. And what I'm doing here, this is kind of some weird things here where basically I'm setting up some variables. And what happens is you have what's called context object. And that's when you create the rules first, and then you give a context object, which is just a key value pair. So you can think of things like location type. And then you hand it to this rule set, and it'll replace in the variables you see here, like new variable location. That doesn't have a value, so that will get sent that key value pair. This is actually much more like a constant down here. It's actually coming from the rule set. Looks complicated, but once you start playing around with it, it's actually pretty easy. And once you get used to it, it takes about the same amount of time as writing those really long if and then statements, but much easier to maintain. And since I'm the guy who ends up having to maintain my own code, since I'm also in the IMS infrastructure group, maintainability is really important to me. So that's one thing I have not done as much as I want, but it's definitely something that shows a lot of promise. I'm hoping to play around with some rule engines, and we have like 4 or 5 different library systems that uses patron information. I'm always having requests from librarians, so my next application rule engine will be take some of the import and export processes to get things into like Iliad and Voyager, and these other places. And each one of these also have their own internal groupings. Just have something that says, here's our AD information, here's some of our registrar information, which is another interesting twist. We have no central authority source for information on students. So we're getting that in 3 to 5 years is the plan for the central managed identity team. But for now, I have 3 different sources of information that may or may not agree with each other. They don't always have the same information. Sometimes one won't provide a certain field. So what my hope is to just show the librarians that information and let them decide what they want their internal groups to be. Because having them try to describe it to me is really hard, and they don't have necessarily a mental model. And I try to show them the information. They see this long spreadsheet. They just start looking out like, well, we just want students to access this. And it's like, so do you mean registered students, or do you mean some of the non-student student groups? Like OLLI scholars who are affiliated with the university, but they're not registered through the university because it's a separate department that runs it. There's like 12 of these groups at least. There's Chinese executives, there's the international language, 2-week training course, things like that where we don't always find out about these people. And then some groups are like, of course they're students, and other groups are like, well, we didn't include them in the license agreement. So I'd much rather have them decide all that, and I just maintain the software. I'll have to watch how I'm doing on time. Let me know if I'm going too fast. If you have questions, just wave your hands. When I get nervous, I talk fast. I talk a lot. Let's go back to the slides. One of the things that kind of got me thinking about rule engines is I went back recently and I reread the Pragmatic Programmer. It's a very good book. It has a chapter on rule engines. I remember way back when I first read this. I was like, this sounds like a good idea. And I looked at the Java rules framework and I was like, this looks really complicated, which is why I didn't do it. But there seems to be a lot more small libraries out there doing it, and it really is a good idea. I mean, things a lot easier. Another thing I get concerned about a lot, because again, my job is to also maintain other people's code to make sure they keep running on servers once the software development group team is done, is readability. Code really needs to be readable. I don't mean it has to have like a lot of comments, it doesn't necessarily have to have that. It just has to have good variable names, things like that. One thing over the years that I think has really helped readability is templating. Now, the one thing that's nice is with a lot of the new frameworks, templating is kind of built in, and I think that's what has improved templating. I used to be skeptical for a while because a lot of the early template languages like JSP or some of the PHP frameworks really early on, I just saw the most horrifying things when I took over from other people. You see like read pages and pages of mixed HTML content and then like 20 function calls. It was almost impossible to read, and I would just shudder when someone would be something like, oh, well, we put everything into this PHP Smutty template, and be like, please, no, don't make me read that. But what I'm starting to see now is a lot more people that keep, it's almost all HTML, and what you have is you have a nice model view controller type setup. So you have a model somewhere, most of the logic actually is being in a separate object, and then views can then express it. So I really kind of use templates for everything, even if it's not built into a framework. And for the two languages I have to use the most that are not associated with the framework, we don't have any frameworks, we use the PHP code. And Perl code, we have a lot of Perl code. And for using data feeds and things like that, we're migrating away from it. Nothing's web-facing. There's still a lot of internal tools that you use with Perl. And Perl is really useful for things like processing workbenches, things like that. We still use it a lot for. The one thing I really like about Twig is template can be extended, so you can have a base template. And then so what I do a lot of times is I have a base template. It has all the views. It has essentially the HTML page that's going to be displayed. Then you can have smaller components like the success message or the error message in the case of, say, the Oak Street application I was talking about, where what we'll do is it's a panel, a bootstrap panel, and if it's successful, it shows a nice green success. And that's in a separate template, and that gets imported. I can show more examples of templating, but I figured most people are kind of used to it. I would just encourage, if you're not using templating already, explore it. There's got to be a templating language you like. Just try enough of them. Eventually, you'll find one of them, and there's like gobs of them now. One thing I have to confess is, ideally, I would do test-driven development, and that's where you make a test for any software you write, and you have the test before you actually write the software. In theory, I'm a great programmer, and I do this all the time. Actuality, no. I end up cranking out some code. I think I should unit test this, and like, if I need to get this done before 5 o'clock, and it's 4:30, right? And I want to go home. And I'm pretty sure I can write this function now. So, and I'll do the unit test, tomorrow. Yeah, no, that never happens. So, I have a confession to make. Recently wrote out some code. We did a bunch of sampling. What this code did was it updated a Iliad instance to have information from our campus, because we've gone through a couple changes to Iliad over the years, and a couple changes to the authentication system. Our latest found we couldn't get information from the authentication system into Iliad very easily, so now we just have a script that checks every 15 minutes for new users, and update the information, and periodically will update information on all users. Well, this is one of my utility functions in it. Can anybody spot my mistake that did not get caught until it rolled down to production that a unit test would have done, caught right away? Oh, I feel much better. Perfect is probably because, regular expressions are not the easiest to read. But that top one is right. That bottom regular expression,
You haven't escaped your S.
It's missing the backslash. So it will nicely trim all the S's in front of your string. Now, this trim function was not called on a lot of fields. It's only called on things like last name, first name, department, all which had uppercase field. So I didn't even notice it when I'm looking at the thing. There's one field that we had to trim because it came in with a bunch of white space from an import process from campus that was slightly important, the email address. We found this out when we started getting bounce backs from the system, and they're like, I figured out right away. Like, they called me, they go, it's really weird. Emails are being rejected, but only one's starting with S. Like, oh. Yeah, I can fix that. We'll have to rerun the entire update process, though. So that's going to take an hour or so. And so I do try to do more unit testing. And every once in a while, something like this reminds me, it's sometimes worth taking the time to do a unit test. I'm sure I'll get out of it in 6 months or so. Okay, so I figured there's a bunch of other little things that make me as a programmer happy, and that I love. Virtual machines. This has to be one of the most awesome things that happened in the past 10 years. I mean, they've existed before that, but really now it's gotten to the point where, you know, we have a cluster of virtual machines. You can download VirtualBox, and now I have several virtual machines on my local desktop that I have kind of geared for different development environments. So I can just load up my Linux Pro machine, and I can keep that updated. And I don't have to worry about things like installing different things onto one machine and having conflict and weird things not working like Eric noticed. It seems like every project out there has like some weird requirement. A lot of them good about it, a lot of the small library projects, not so much. So when that happens, I just spin up a new virtual machine, give it like 20 gigs, and say, starting fresh. Version control. I have to admit, I try to be pretty flexible and, you know, do whatever is good for you for programming. This is one of those places where, you know, you've got to use version control. One of the really cool things I discovered recently was everyone's starting to use Git, and I find Git has a huge learning curve, especially if you come back from a background when you're using CBS, SVN. It's really cool. There's really a lot of cool features, but it's really hard to remember to use them. There's this really cool site called GitHub on GitHub, just to be a little confusing, but it's a game where you have to like do Git commands, and it tells you whether or not you did the things that achieve your objective, and it keeps giving you goals that get harder and harder. It might be something like, in one command, find out when this bug was introduced, which you can do in Git. There's a nice feature that you basically say, here's a test to see, you know, I could have gone back there and said, when did I screw up that trim function? I can give it that unit test, and I say, find when that was introduced. And it just Git does it. It basically loads in, it does a binary search, it goes halfway back, tries that, sees if it fails. If it doesn't, it goes, you know, back further. Logging. If I'm trying to fix your server and it crashes every night at 1 a.m., it's really nice to know what it's doing without having to get a memory dump. So that can get, yet again, my server side talking. There's, I really like the log for X, I call them the log for X library. They started from log4j, which is Java logging library. I really like them. The config files are a little bit of a pain to read, but I can go in really easily and just change like 1 or 2 lines from like say debug or info to debug, and it does gain more information. It uses logging levels ideas when you write your code. You write something like, okay, no one really wants to see this information unless, you know, something keeps catching on fire. So we'll assign that debug level, so like maybe, you know, a dump of all the variables. And, or you can have what usual, you know, the info level of, hey, I set it up, I'm running, I'm happy, still happy. This is a weird one for me, but I've worked with enough people who have seen this happen, and I think it's like a programmer hypnosis. You start with a batch of stuff, and then so you run it to see if it works, and it's a really big batch of stuff, because someone just gave you this bundle, and it doesn't work. So you start trying to fix the one thing, and it doesn't work. Don't do big batches of stuff. Don't run something that takes 3 hours and then say, oh, it broke again. Figure out some way to break those up. Like for Merck records, there was somebody who was having an issue injecting a huge batch of Merck records. So what I did was I used the gas Merck dump tool, and I split it into like 10 hertz, right? Because they also didn't have any logging in that particular script, so they know when it broke. So again, logging, very good. But what they can do then is they just run each of those 10 batches, and it's much quicker than 3 hours. And then they figured out eventually by doing just keep breaking those apart where the problem was. I really believe this. I've seen so many comments in here when I see other people's code. The comment describes a beautifully, wonderfully working system. The code is all one-letter variable names that does not do what the comment says. So it's gotten to the point where honestly, I just don't really read comments anymore because occasionally they're useful, but if they're telling me what the code is doing, I take it with a huge grain of salt. Graphical diff tools. I will confess, for as many years as I try to learn how to read the output of a diff from the command line, and I love the command line, I can't do it. For large files especially, I like to use Meld. There's a couple others out there. WinMerge, if you're using Windows, is really good. Meld I use on basically all my Linux systems. I tend to use WinMerge on my Windows system. One thing I've used this for, and not just code, but for data dumps. Like if I have a data feed, because one of the things I do a lot is deal with the various feeds from various systems. It's really handy to run it, especially in black box systems where I can't control the stuff because there's some other unit that we're submitting it to or we're pulling it from. I can see if something has changed or what the differences are in the actual data itself. And I can just jump down to the first difference and figure out, oh, hey, yeah, at some point, we've just got a bunch of Unicode characters in here for no apparent reason. So, users. I don't know if any of you have had to work with users a lot. Users are pretty good at figuring out problems. However, then people will tell you stuff like, so recently I had, well, we need to add some more checkboxes to these routing options. We want to add a bunch more locations, and each location should have a checkbox. But then there'll be a drop down for some of the others, so we can check out route to others. And then I just kind of said, maybe you just want to have a sortable list instead, because essentially what they want to do is indicate that something has been routed to different locations. But like checkboxes won't give you the ordering that it happened or anything like that, so I showed them a sortable list. They were much happier with that. But this one can be really hard, especially since it takes talking to users, not just talking to them, but it really helps to see what they're doing and when they hit the problem. And it's hard to get time for that, but it really pays off. Well, someone, I saw you. But also when doing web application development, I cannot live now without Jquery and Bootstrap. I know a lot of people are starting to like Foundation. I have not played around with it, similar to Bootstrap, where it has a bunch of CSS for you. It makes things, I'm not going to say beautiful, but it makes it a lot less ugly than I would do otherwise. I'm just going to list a couple favorite books along with software development. Refactoring, I really love this book. It's old. It's from late 90s, I think. But this is the best book I can think of on object-oriented programming, which you would not think of necessarily because it's kind of a step above the usual intro level. But what this really does is how to tell you how to make small changes to your code and test them without breaking everything. It's a really nice way to think of things. This is probably one of the first books that really started pushing test-driven development, that you test things before you actually execute them. It kind of gives you a guide on creating objects and creating an interface of things that actually is easy to test. It's an excellent book. It's not that big, and in fact, only the first 3 chapters are actually what you read. The rest of it are common software patterns. Clean code. I just finished reading this. It's a really excellent thing of how to make your code usable. That another human being or yourself 6 months later can have to go back and read and kind of figure out what was happening. Some other cool stuff, Hack5 has a nice show. It's really, really techy, but you know, you can search the internet for it, but it talks a lot about computers. I like security now. It's not really programming stuff, but if you want to know about networks and computers, excellent information. And I like hacking around in command line. Command line Foo is a really fun site where people just submit their favorite command line things and people vote on them. And sometimes they just go around and browse, like, oh wow, I didn't know that tool existed. So I feel like I've been talking kind of fast, but any questions, comments, discussions? All right. Well, thanks for listening to me babble. I hope people learn some. Feel free to send some feedback, things like that. I should be on the wiki.
I do have a question.
Huh?
I do have a question. That's okay. What do you do about, like, where do you put writing documentation, for instance, into your
Documentation.
workflow? Everybody's
I'm bad about documentation, but it's really important. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite because whenever anything breaks that of someone else's code and I have to support it, I just go back to the software development group and go to that person and go, I can't find any documentation on this on the wiki. Why don't you fix the problem? And then, you know, make sure you write up some documentation about it, so next time I can read the documentation and go into this code. But one thing I do, I'm not very good about documenting within the code, so part of that is because I never really got in the habit of doing it for the Perl stuff. PHP, I'm a little better. I'll do PHP doc when I think about it, but I'm still kind of bad at that. But it's really important. Otherwise, speaking from the support end, it's almost impossible to support software that does not have documentation because you have to read all the code. So it's one thing I struggle with doing better. The one thing I find works for me is we've got a wiki on campus that the central IT office runs. Anything I even think of might be important, I throw up in that wiki. It's ugly brain dumps usually. But what happens then is something breaks, so I have to go back and touch the code. I then go into that documentation and clean it up a little bit. So stuff I don't work on very much, it doesn't get documented as well, but stuff that I have to keep going back to, slowly the documentation does get better. Anyone else have like good ideas for documentation, like make it easier?
Does anyone write documentation?
There is, if you are interested, there is a con for documentation. Link out that Becky you sent turned me on to, which is like the coolest thing ever. It's essentially 3 days of learning how to properly write documentation and then how to integrate it within your current chain of command or whatever it is that you want to use. So.
I'm posting there on the wiki.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it looked really cool because they talk about all different types of styles, and so. Like, I'm not a linear person, but when I write documentation, I'm very linear, so it's kind of, so for people like that, who maybe the opposite or some other kind of combination, it's kind of cool how they come up with all different ideas, and all of it is valid. But, I mean, like you said, it is very important because you end up in a project that you have no idea the history of, and you kind of SOL, there's nothing.
Well, I know one thing I want to do more, and I made mentally a requirement any future project I'm involved in. Problem is, a lot of times I get brought into something that's already running. But the first thing I'm going to do is a data dictionary, because even really simple definitions, what seems to be a simple definition. I'm sitting in a group of 8 people, and one of the other person who's a programmer, and maybe 2 librarians, 2 staff members for a project. And everybody says things really easily, like student. But then when I go back, my university doesn't offer me anything called student. I have people who are taking classes. I have people who are paying us money but not taking classes. They students. So I think that even just having a glossary to data dictionary would be like a drastic improvement for my own workflow.
Regarding documentation, that sounds super useful, and in as much as I do documentation, I'm kind of doing it like you. As I go back and touch things, I should probably put something in here about what I did. I find my biggest problem is often more and more, I can kind of tell what I was doing 6 months ago, but I can't always remember why I did it. And so I'm more focusing on trying to put my reasoning in, like, I decided to change this on this day because reason. Because that's the thing that I often, or, you know, if I look at something my predecessor did, why in the name of God would you do it that way? But I know there must have been a reason.
I gotta say, that's why I love version control. I try to get as much of that log messages as possible, and it always drives me nuts when I take over some project and I just see, like, fix some stuff. Like, okay, I guess I looked through the diffs, huh?
If you have to pick, which one do you choose more, documentation or testing?
That's a tough choice. So the question was, if I have to pick, which do I do, documentation or testing? I think in the end, I focus more on testing. That's probably why I haven't done as much documentation. Because to some extent, it's more important that it works, but that's kind of a catch-22 because I have a captive audience a lot of times. People have to use my stuff, right? So I also have to make it work. Now, if I'm trying to convince, if it's a project where I'm working with the public, that's where it gets trickier because people will just not use it if it doesn't have good documentation. Sometimes they're willing to accept like small errors. They'll complain about, but they'll still use the system, right? They don't really care, oh, well, this is, you know, misspelled. They'll send in a message, but they'll still use the system. Or, you know, maybe if I do this one really weird thing, like this in advanced search, it blows up. Well, 2 people will find that and care about it. So it is, to some extent, it's what audience is going for, but honestly, yeah, testing is usually what I choose. I think people are probably getting hungry, and it looks like it just hit lunchtime-ish.
Thanks very much, John.
All right, thanks everyone for a good first morning. Lunch is in the back, and we'll just kind of hang out. At 1 o'clock, we will sort of regroup and start the Hackfest. Anybody here a newbie to a Hackfest? Anyone done one of these before? Okay, it's fun. Newbie to a Hackfest, so we'll have a bunch of fun problems that people have suggested. If you have ideas, projects you want to work on, things you haven't gotten around to at work that you want free labor for, whatever, you can propose them here to the group. And we have a lot of people here, so people can sort of pick and choose things that sound interesting, and we can work on them together and develop stuff. Maybe we can all sit and write documentation, because that would be really important. And anyway, so if you have other ideas for the Hackfest, feel free to tweet them or let me know or add them to the wiki. There's about 8 up there right now, but we could always use more. There's whiteboards? I've only been in this fancy room and there are screens down. Whiteboards? What? Whiteboards, people. Thank you, sir.